Facebook took a new and unprecedented step. This is from Reuters. Facebook Inc. said on Monday it was treating the next 2 weeks as a major civic event and would remove certain content containing the phrase "Stop the Steal" from its social media platforms. Quote, with continued attempts to organize events against the outcome of the U.S. presidential election, that can lead to violence, and use of the term by those involved in Wednesday's violence in D.C., we're taking this additional step in the lead up to the inauguration, the company said in a blog post. A Facebook spokeswoman clarified the company would allow posts that clearly share the "Stop the Steal" phrase to either condemn or to discuss neutrally. In November, Facebook removed the Stop the Steal group, in which supporters of U.S. President Donald Trump posted violent rhetoric and false claims of election fraud. So I don't know if they've ever gone this far before, which is to say, if anybody uses the phrase "Stop the Steal" in a supportive sense, that's being taken down. I don't know if they've ever gone this far before. And, you know, I don't know how anybody could read this story and not take away that not only is there a slippery slope, we're already halfway down the slippery slope. So you can't, in my opinion, look at somebody say something and then say, hey, maybe not, there could be negative consequences associated with this, and that's enough for me to pull it down. Because let's be honest, as much as we hate it, it's all bullshit. Stop the steal, fraudulent election, rigged election, all those claims, total bullshit. But what actual percentage of people who are saying that stuff end up committing violence? What's the actual percentage of people that committed violence who said those things? I'm willing to bet it's 99.99% of the people who have talked about fraudulent election, rigged election. Whether they believe it or not, a lot of these people believe it and are brainwashed. Some people are nefarious liars. But it's only a very, 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 very tiny percentage of people that actually have committed crimes in the name of this stuff. Okay? So I don't think that's enough to merit pulling it down. And if you're going to go down this road, and the argument is, hey, well, it's not true. I agree it's not true. But are you going to go after every single time somebody brings up the JFK conspiracy, which versions of it are not true? Maybe a version of it is true. I don't know. But are you going to pull down the JFK conspiracy stuff? Are you going to pull down the 9/11 conspiracy stuff? You know, are you going to pull down Russiagate stuff? Russiagate has been proven false. You know, there were people inside Trump's administration who went down, but they went down on crimes unrelated to Russia. It was corruption stuff, and they are corrupt. But he's not a Manchurian candidate that's been under Vladimir Putin's thumb since 1987, as some idiots in the media claimed. Are you going to pull down that stuff? Are you going to pull down... We just covered the story. Mike Pompeo is lying to the American people and saying that Iran and Al-Qaeda are working together, and he's doing this to build up the propaganda to go to war with Iran. Are you going to pull that down? Are you going to pull down Mike Pompeo's page or anything that tries to link Iran and Al-Qaeda? Because not only is that not true, but that has potentially worse consequences than the Stop the Steal stuff. So you can't, my point is, guys, you can't micromanage language and speech, and you especially can't do it layers removed. Like, yes, if somebody does a direct threat of violence, that not only is that against terms of service, that's against the law. You're not, even with a total free speech absolutism, you're not allowed to do a direct threat of violence, and that makes sense. But what we're talking about here is not pulling down direct threats of violence. We're talking about people who talk about a conspiracy that's wrong. And if you talk about it in a positive way, it's going to get banned. I'm sorry, this goes way too far. It goes way too far. And what you're going to find is they're not going to go after the liberal corporate democratic sacred positions and conspiracies as much as they'll go after the conservative ones. Because listen, that's the people who run these big social media companies, generally speaking, they're fans of the corporate Democrats. They're elites. They're fans of the corporate Democrats. So whatever their conspiracies are, like Russiagate, get a full pass. Full pass. They're only going after like the Trump-related conspiracies. And I think that's, if you're going to start pulling stuff down, you at least have to do it with some sort of objective standard in mind. And the objective standard, at least that we're dealing with here, would have to be no conspiracy stuff that potentially could lead to harm. Potentially, again, potentially, which means like almost any conspiracy can be pulled down with that logic, because there's somebody who's crazy enough out there to take some sort of conspiracy and be violent over it. Even if 99.99999% of people who believe in a conspiracy don't act on it. So is that your standard? Because this is the standard you set up. The standard is no conspiracy stuff where there might be some negative consequences associated with it. Okay, but then you have to be objective with that. You have to pull down the JFK stuff, the 9/11 conspiracy stuff, the Russiagate stuff, the U.S. government dictated ones. That's the other thing, is like giant glaring exception for all state propaganda and state violence. I mean, listen, we all know if Facebook was around, or if the social media outlets Twitter was around during the lead up to the Iraq War, they either would not have gone after the propagandists pushing us to war, or they would have pulled down the people arguing against it. You know? The people today who were smeared are people who questioned the Syria gas attack, and the whistleblowers proved that those people were correct, the people who were questioning the Syrian gas attack. So I have no doubt that if these social media outlets were around back then, in the lead up to the Iraq War, they either would have not taken down the stuff that's propaganda lying us into war, or they would have taken down the people questioning the propaganda and said, that's fake news. Bottom line is, guys, there should be no ministry of truth. There should be no ministry of truth. Because then it's the age-old philosophical question, who watches the Watchmen? So you give this group of people veto power over the national discourse. How the hell do you know that they're going to be right about everything? And how the hell do you know that they're always going to line up with your own sensibilities? You know, it's so short-sighted. And the bottom line is, you cannot and should not have Silicon Valley oligarch billionaires get veto power over the discourse. That's not to say everything's hunky-dory if you don't have that. Of course there's going to be problems. Of course it's going to be messy. Of course there's going to be some instances of violence. But from my perspective, it's the least bad option of all bad options, because at least with that approach, you have a free system. And the same system that allows a crazy right-winger to talk about stop the steal and fraudulent election is the same system that would allow people like me to question the liars who got us into war, to call them out directly, to debunk the propaganda. Basically, my point is, it's a package deal. It's a package deal. If people on the left, if Marxists, if socialists, if you want free speech, it's a package deal. That includes idiots and conspiracy theorists on the right having it. Again, direct threats of violence, there can be action taken against that. But what they're doing here is not just going after direct threats of violence. They're not. They're going after an entire genre of conspiracy theory. And I don't agree with that. I think that goes way too far. Way too far. If people are specifically breaking laws, go after them. Go after them. If somebody's directly threatening violence, go after it. But they're saying all stop the steal stuff, that's where somebody agrees with stop the steal. Sorry, you're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to be wrong. You know? I think everybody who voted for Donald Trump was wrong. Do I want to ban tens of millions of people? No, that's ridiculous. I think they're all wrong, demonstrably wrong, and they have harmful beliefs. I still wouldn't ban them. You know? Shit. I mean, I think every single person who voted for any other candidate other than Bernie in the primary, I think they're wrong. Would I ban everybody who didn't agree with me on that? No. It's like, I get it. When you bring up the First Amendment in the context of issues like this, people kind of scoff at it and mock it and act like this is not a First Amendment issue. Technically, they're correct about the legality of it. There's nothing, this is not a legal issue involving the First Amendment, of course. But it absolutely is a debate about the principle of freedom of speech and free expression. It's not about the First Amendment in terms of the legality of it. It most certainly is about the First Amendment in terms of the spirit of it and the principle of free speech and free expression. And I don't think that free speech stops at the borderline of the internet. In fact, I think the internet is the new public square. I think the new social media outlets are the new public square. You know, and it's very strange to see people who are on the left make the libertarian argument, the capitalist argument, the argument of private company, they can do whatever the hell they want. Really? Is that it? Are they just private companies? Is Facebook and Twitter, are these just private companies? They're a lot more than just private companies at this point. They're a lot more than that. When you have world politics conducted on there, when it is the public square for people to have a voice, that's more than just a private company. And it certainly should be treated legally like more than just a private company. It should be regulated like a public utility. That's the left-wing position. The left-wing position is regulate these like public utilities. Don't treat them just like private companies. Don't give Jack and Mark Zuckerberg and Silicon Valley oligarch billionaires the ability to do whatever the hell they want because it's their company. That's a very right-wing libertarian capitalist argument. That is not my position. So I don't want people on the left to make that argument, but unfortunately many people are. Even if you cheer this on, there's going to come a day where you're not cheering on what they're doing. Because we've already given examples of the opposite. Reddit banning Chapo Trap House, for example. Go talk to Rania Khalek, Abby Martin, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton, The Gray Zone. There's a number of left-wing outlets that are just correct about stuff that have been censored or deplatformed. And it ain't going to stop. Because that's the other thing that happens is once they start banning the right-wing stuff and the right-wingers scream bloody murder and say, you got to go after, why are you not going after the left too? Because they're idiots and they don't know how to say like, no, in principle, this is wrong. Don't ban anybody. So they say, well, the left-wingers get away with stuff. And then they go after, you know, like the Red Scare podcast was just banned on Twitter. They go after like, leftists have no power. The liberals have power. The corporate Democrats have power. So leftists are next on the chopping block, guaranteed. So again, be careful what you wish for.